My office is actually in the courthouse, so if you ever have any questions, you're more than welcome to stop by. You can bring things with you if you like. It freaks out everybody else in the courthouse, but I love it. People walk in with like tree samples. I'm like, yes. But if not, I didn't bring anything with my phone number on it, but yes, if you go out, my phone number's there, my email is there as well. So if you ever have any questions about horticulture at all, trees, lawns, things that you're growing, if bugs show up places, generally if they're bugs that are in your garden and not necessarily on your animals or yourself are preferred, but mostly all this horticulture stuff. So today, however, I'm going to be talking about worm bin composting or vermiposting, and I get very excited about this because it's just kind of fun, and I feel like it's my little secret because I have a vermiposting bin or a worm composting bin that lives under my desk in my office. And nobody knows that it's there except me and then my office mates because I tell them about it, and if people come in, I show them my worms. But you would never know that it's there. You don't ever smell it. You don't ever hear it. It's just this like innocuous looking Christmas colored container. So I'm going to kind of go over what worm bin composting is, how you can get started, and then I'll demonstrate a little bit of how I made mine with this demonstration kit right here. Are there any questions before I begin? All right, if there are any questions during this, just throw your hand up and ask.
Are you the only extension?
No, I'm the horticulture person.
Oh.
We have an ag person, and then like family living, 4-H is also a part of the extension service as well, and then a whole team of nutrition educators. But I do all the plants. I do the cool stuff, in my personal opinion.
Oh.
But there's lots. There's a handful of us, so yeah. I'd be really sad if I was just by myself. All right, so worm bin composting is often called vermiposting, and it just means the worms. So vermiposting is composting with worms. And so this is kind of what a pile of vermipost looks like. There you're seeing a bunch of red wiggler worms, which are the ones that generally do this, in a pile of compost, which is kind of their own waste product, but that's what compost becomes. And so this picture is actually from somebody who is beginning to harvest it, because that is ready to go vermipost. And mine is also ready to go, so later you can definitely look and see what that looks like. So the question is, well, why might you want to do this? And I like doing it for several reasons. First, it's kind of fun because you can have year-round composting. Now, if you eat a lot of vegetables, like I do during the summer, your vermiposting bin will not be able to keep up. But it is kind of fun to be able to continually compost throughout the year. So if you have kitchen scraps, like a couple apples, like here and there. Here, this is just, I did this last week. So I don't know if it's still in there or not. Some apple cores and a tea bag that you can toss in there. And so you can kind of do this year round and continually compost. It's great for kitchen scraps, so a lot of other people who do this tend to keep it in their kitchen or somewhere where it's easily accessible that way. It's pretty quick. I switched out my bin in like March or April, and it's fully ready to go, and I probably could have harvested it a month or two ago, but I wanted to be able to show it to you guys here. It's relatively easy. I have definitely forgotten to feed my worms for a couple weeks on, I forgot about them because they live under my desk, and they're perfectly fine. So if you find the right environment for them, they're really easy to manage. And then it creates this really, really great compost, this concentrated organic matter. Generally, if you were to go to the store and buy it, the earthworm castings or something like that is really expensive because it's super concentrated, really, really highly nutritionally, or like high nutrition quality, but you can just make it in your basement. And then some people also do this to get the worms so you can take them fishing. So there's a lot of different ways and reasons why you could do this. So what I'm going to go over this is just kind of the nitty-gritty of how to do this. So first talking about the worms, then the beds that they live in, and then what you can do with the compost that they create. So the first is the worms. They're called red wiggler. It's a very particular type of worm. And the reason why it's particular is that a lot of the different worms live in different temperature ranges. And red wigglers are really great for the temperatures that humans tend to prefer in their living dwellings. It's about 55 to 75 degrees. Fahrenheit. And that's generally like what we live in our homes. In the courthouse where my office is, it's perfect because the temperature never changes year round. And so they just live under my desk, very happy there. They're self-limiting, which means that the population is never going to outgrow their space and their food source. This could mean that as they die, they get eaten by their brethren, and you would never know the difference because it's just more compost. But in general, you just have, they're there, they're going to live there, and they'll fill it out and do their job. And they're very effective at what they do. They consume half their body weight in a day. So if you have a really high population and you have a very good system going, then you can make a pretty quick turnaround in compost. With the amount that I have, in 3 months, you could get a really good amount of compost to be able to use. So the red wigglers are perfect for this. When I got my worms, I ordered them online from a source online, and I recommend doing that because then you know you're going to get red wigglers. You can go to a bait store and get red wigglers as well, but they might not always be exactly what you want them to be. They might have some other ones in there. It's important, if you do this though, to not release your worms into the wild if you've decided that you no longer want to do this. Because let's say you went to the bait store and there was red wigglers but some other ones in there. We actually do have invasive earthworms, like the crazy jumping worm. Its name is actually crazy jumping worm. That is really, really detrimental in gardens because it eats everything super fast. And so if it's kind of like putting the goldfish in the pond. They just don't do it. It's not good for everybody. So I would definitely order them online, and if you just do red wigglers, this is the composting worm. This is what everybody uses. So for the worm home, it's kind of like the Goldilocks, I feel like. It's not too wet, but it's not too dry. It's got to be right in between. And for some reason in my bed, I figured that out. In the beginning, I kind of struggled with trying to figure out the right moisture level, but eventually I got it. And you'll know if the moisture's not right because they'll try to escape. And sometimes they do anyway, but that's just how it goes. Yes?
How many worms did you start out with?
So I did a class with my master gardeners, and we bought a big thing of it, and I shared it with everybody. So I had a handful. And then that took about 6 months to 9 months to really go through that container. Now that that's full of them, it takes about 3 months. So like you could take a handful of those home and start your own.
So you don't need to order like a mass?
No, you don't need a ton at all, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you don't have to start with too many. So when it comes to the worm home, the bedding that you can use, I think it's on the next one. Okay, so you can use a lot of different things for bedding, and this is just the bedding, they'll eat this. So this is no longer exists in there. This is just shredded paper from our office. I've also done this with newspaper. You can use cardboard as well. If you're gonna use newspaper and print paper, just don't use the glossy stuff. It doesn't work as well. You can also use peat moss or coconut coir or commercial bedding. I don't know if people have actually done that because that requires purchasing things. And paper, we generally have ready and already like wanting to be recycled. So this is just shredded copier paper. And when you put it in, you want to get it moist. And so, I'm gonna hope this works out well. So it's kind of just, when you do it, you want it to the point where it's not gonna, like if you squeeze, you're not going to get it, nothing is going to come out of it, but it's moist enough that you're not, you don't have dryness. It's a Goldilocks thing. I'm sure, and I'll show you guys can come up and look at it later if you want. But the idea is it's just so it's moist enough because if you think about where worms enjoy living, they like to live in the soil where it's nice and moist. And so we're trying to emulate that here. Now I know that this generally, like we're looking at this and this is paper, so it's not nearly as, like this is not soil, you wouldn't think that maybe they'd want to live here, but that's why you also have to provide a little grit. And when it's grit, it's, it works kind of like with birds where you have to have things inside of the digestive system to help grind up whatever the worm is eating. So when it comes to grit in an artificial system like this, you can use pulverized or crushed up eggshells. So if you put your eggshells that are dried into the, like a Cuisinart or something like that, or you can use coffee grounds. So I stole some coffee grounds from our used Keurig machine today, and you would just kind of put that in there. Now this stuff smells great because it's the vanilla puff flavor. If you have the choice, I would not use the flavored ones, but this is for demonstration purposes, so I think we'll be okay today. And later you can definitely come up here and look and see, but it's generally, there's a little bit of moisture in the bottom, which I'm not super worried about, but we have a little bit of grit, a little bit of bedding, and this is mostly ready to go for them. And so I probably would do this so that at least, there was at least like 2 to 3 inches flat of like bedding on it. This is not quite enough, but that's okay. And so, yeah, so now this is ready for worms. And I didn't take much. Now,
How much coffee grounds should you put in?
So I just eyeballed it to the where it kind of looks like it's a little bit dirty, if that makes sense. That's not precise at all, but the idea is there's enough for it to eat, but not overwhelming amounts. Yeah.
Are you going to talk about organic materials? I mean, like grass clippings?
Yeah, that's kind of like the food for the next one.
Oh.
Yeah, this is just preparing them for their space to live.
Oh.
Now they do eat this too, but we just need a good medium for them to like feel comfortable living in.
Is that going to be like a bottom layer?
No, this is all of it, because this is just for that. If you're talking about like outdoor, that's a little bit different.
Oh.
But this is like, this is just a miniature version of what I did for this guy here.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
I see.
So yeah, this is like, this is ready to go for the worms. When I got my kit of worms, I didn't have a thing prepared for them yet, and so I just had potting soil, and so I used potting soil for grit, and they handled it perfectly fine. It's not preferred because in potting soil, there's not as much of that. You need a little bit more toughness in it so that they can do it. Sand has also been used as grit as well if you put a little bit of sand in. But these worms are surprisingly really tough and can handle a lot of different situations, which is nice. Yeah, okay. So then food. So if we have our worms and we're ready to go with our worm, like our bedding's good. When it comes to food, so the grit, cornmeal, coffee grounds, or finely crushed eggshells. Now I say coffee grounds as grit. I drink a lot of coffee. I drink a French press every day. If I tried to give my worms a French press of coffee grounds every day, they would drown in coffee grounds. So I don't recommend, if you're a regular coffee drinker like I am, that you compost all of your coffee grounds, because it's a lot of coffee grounds for your worms. And then if you get so much in there that you're changing the acidity levels, it might not be good. So when it comes to coffee grounds, I generally like to recommend just putting in enough that it provides a little bit of grit for them to be able to use, but not doing it every morning after you're done with your coffee. For my ven, I don't do that. My ven also lives in my office, so I just bring in things throughout the week to feed them with. The best thing for worms in the worm bin is vegetable waste, vegetable and fruit waste. I generally like apple cores, peppers, any leafy things. So when my indoor plants, when they shed their leaves, I'll put the leaves in there from that. You can do tea bags, you can do a whole host of different fruits and vegetables. You can even do pasta. This is pasta that has been cooked but has no sauce or oil on it. So generally not any pasta that's going to be left on your plate, unfortunately. Coffee grounds in smaller amounts, and then tea bags. If you have tea bags, you tear them open, you toss them in there, and they'll eat the leaves as well as the bag it comes in. When it comes to tea bags too, a lot of them no longer have the staples on them, so then that way you can microwave them, so you can just put in the paper as well. So I just put the whole tea bag, the string, and everything in. Sometimes this could be fun because if you put something with seeds in there, the seeds sprout, and then you're like, oh, I have a bunch of little pepper seedlings, and you just kind of pull them out and put them down, and then they'll eat them. I also read, and I do this, where if there are worm escapees and they have no longer are trying to escape, then you toss them in there as well, and they will be consumed. So it's like the full circle of life.
Could we back up a little bit?
Yes.
And talk about how worms eat? I mean, they don't have teeth or mouth.
No.
Or-
As far as I understand, I'm not an entomologist, and I'm pretty sure that it's the grinding action of the grit that they have that breaks up the material. But I don't know. Do you know?
No,
Oh.
it's news to me that worms have mouths.
Yeah, I don't, it's not a mouth like we think of it. I actually have no idea, because I just want their compost. And I mean, I do, talk to them sometimes, but that's as far as we go in our relationship. And there's a book back there about worms and wormeries that might have that information. All those books can be checked out afterwards if you find them interesting and useful.
Excuse me, my
Yeah.
thinking is that if you know how it gets into their bodies, it might have something to do with what you put in there.
Yeah, that would be true too, yeah. The compost that we're creating it's basically worm poop that we're very excited about. So when we compost, that's the idea. And so this is mostly paper and then whatever nutrients are coming from the food that I feed them. So those vegetables and fruits are going to be working that back into the soil. We generally avoid fats, meat scraps, and bones. Not only is that not really going to work in a little bin, it will start to smell. That's also why you should tend to avoid citrus. It just takes a really long time for citrus peels to break down, and by the time that they get to it, it's going to start smelling. Onion peels, garlic peels, things like that. I also tend to avoid any of the brassicas or the cole crops. So broccoli, cauliflower, kale, things like that. They would eat it, but those are the things that kind of smell as they break down. And so if I don't, I tend just not to put those in there because I don't want it to have a problem being. You definitely could, especially if you have a very prolific and very well managed bin, put those in, but I would avoid the onion and the garlic and the citrus. The worms just don't like it as much as the other things in there, and it'll start to break down and smell before they're able to get at it. Which, when you're doing this, you don't want to put in food that's already rotting. If it's bruised or it's going south, definitely put it in there. But if it already has rotted spots on it and things like that, we just don't want to put it in there because then it's going to start to rot and smell before the worms are going to be able to get to it. So when I have apples, when the apples start to get weird and shrivelly and they're like, oh, that's perfect for the worms. But I had a peach and it started to rot on my counter and that I just did not give to the worms. You can cut off the rot part and then put that in there. But you don't want it to already be rotting. When I feed my worms, I like to cut it up a little bit. So if I have an apple, I'll cut it in quarters or maybe eighths and toss that in there. But in general, they're not super picky. I had a colleague, she had one of the fancy worm bins. I don't have a fancy one to display here. I like to be thrifty. You can buy the fancy ones. They're a couple $100s, and they have these big systems where you put it in the top and it works through, and I have no idea what goes on in there. But at the end, you get compost, and there's worms in between. With that, she would take her vegetables and her fruit. She would actually make a slurry by putting it in her Vitamix and then pouring that in. And apparently that worked great. Yeah, that's a little more than I wanted to do for my worms. I'm like, that's weird. That's a smoothie for your worms. But it worked for her. And so you don't have to do that. You can just cut them up and put it in there. What I tend to do is I'm cutting up vegetables and fruit, and it's all the pieces that I don't want anymore, like the insides of the peppers or the outside or the apples or the core or something like that. I just generally put it in a jar, bring it in, and then put it into my worm bin that day. So all of those scraps of the things that we're not going to eat. Now, if you do put things in with roots, if you cut off the celery and put that, the root part in, it might try to grow before the worms can eat it, but eventually they'll get to it, so it's fine. Any questions about worm food? And generally this kind of stuff? Yeah?
Do they process the seeds, apple seeds, and all that kind of stuff?
I have not found an apple seed in there, so I think so. I think what happened with the pepper seeds is they sprouted, and then they kind of died because I pulled them up, and so then they ate the sprouted parts, but I think eventually they might. Yeah, I think I put a different bigger seed in there. And once it got it got moist and kind of broke down a little bit that way, then they came in and they ate it. So, Yeah, you mentioned grass clippings, and in general, I wouldn't worry about that kind of thing because this is just a smaller scale, and so just kitchen scraps are great, and that's what creates this concentrated, this concentrated compost anyway, because it's highly nutritious, the quality of the stuff we're giving them. So if we're giving them grass clippings and leaves from our indoor plants, that sort of works too, but it's the vegetables and the fruit that really make the compost they produce that high of quality. And then, when you're doing outdoor composting, you have to follow the 2-to-1 browns and greens rule. Well, because their bedding is brown, we don't really worry about that as much. This is the carb in their world, basically. So they'll eat this when they're hungry and they need it. So, any other questions about worm food?
How often do you put paper in there?
I only put new paper in whenever I change them out. That's when it gets to the harvesting, which we're not quite at, but when you'll see here, so that's like a brand new, ready for new worms. And this is ready to be harvested worms. So you can see the difference here. And later you can come out. So this is like a chunk of paper that's left because they couldn't get at it. But so at this stage, I'm going to be trying to pull all of the individual worms out and then putting them in here. And then all that's left in here is the compost. So essentially you only do this when you're harvesting them and kind of getting the compost out of it. So in general, the food is the stuff that you add in, like the fruits and the vegetables that kind of gives them more to compost in a way.
When did you start that?
So I did that May or June. So they were really good at doing it. I didn't realize how well they were how much the colony had grown until I didn't look at them for a couple of weeks, maybe a month, and all the paper was gone. I was like, oh no! They are very, very robust. So that colony could probably do it, eat through it in 3 months or something like that. So very robust group. All right, what do I got next? Okay, so the worm feeding. Now this is where we can avoid a ton of problems. That's gross. That's gonna smell, right? If you look at my bin, there were apple pieces in there, but you couldn't smell it, you couldn't even see it, and that's because you wanna do a few very simple things. First is very placement. So when I see sometimes this happening, people just throw it on the top. That doesn't really work because then it just piles it on the top, it's kind of gross. What you want to do is you want to bury it in various places around the bin. And the idea there is when they're done with the apple over here, they'll migrate to the apple over there, and then the apple over there, and they can all find a place to eat. If you all just toss it in on the top or just in the same corner, then it's going to be an overwhelming amount of food for the worms, and then it'll start to rot before the worms can eat it, and that's where we get the smell from. You want to bury it at least an inch below whatever the bedding is. And so this is pretty light, and mine is not as deep as I'd like. So I basically just put it on the bottom and make sure that it's covered a little bit on the top. And that way the worms are going to eat it because they don't like being at the surface. They like being below the surface. And so they'll be able to eat it, and then once again, it's not going to break down and be smell and kind of have that deteriorating food quality that we tend not to like in compost. And then you also want to start slow. So if you have just a little handful of worms, you don't want to put your entire week's worth of vegetable choppings in there if you eat a lot of vegetables, because that's just going to be too much. It'll break down and start to rot before the worms can eat it, and that's where we get the smells from. So in this picture, that's just way too much food for those worms. I also would not put eggshells in like that because they're not going to eat the eggshells. They can't do that. When we have eggshells in compost, it's because you can pulverize it and break down and they use it as the grit. But it doesn't work in this case. If you have an outdoor system where you have different insects that are helping to break down things, that's a totally different story. But in these, we just have worms. So I wouldn't do that. Also, banana peels are another one of those things where I'd put 1 a week in there, not 5 or 6, because that's a lot. But they do eat through bananas super quickly. This is another fun thing, especially if you have kids, is experimenting to see how quickly different things can be eaten. Like the speed at which a worm can eat a banana is very impressive. And I like you put in I like to put in the apples and then pull out the apple that's left, and it's such a thin little layer of the skin, like that top layer of waxy skin layer that's left, and it's just neat to see what they eat and they don't eat and how they eat it. So it's another fun part of it. But anyway, so you just want to avoid this by varying where you bury it, making sure you at least bury it in there, and then just starting slow. This is also way too wet. If you can kind of see that it's glistening, it's just too wet, it's not going to work. So some of the problems is odor. So we kind of covered odor a lot through this. My worm bin doesn't smell at all because I almost underfeed them because they live in my office and I often forget to bring things in. I've definitely run around the office just trying to find apples that people weren't going to eat because I'm like, I need to feed my worms. But I tend to underfeed them. But making sure that you're not overfeeding them is going to avoid that odor. Making sure you're not putting in things that are already rotten, that they're going to break down, and then avoiding things that take too long to break down or smell in and of themselves. So the garlic and the onion skins and then the citrus, which they just won't get to in time. Fruit flies can be another issue, and fruit flies are similar to the odor, and then also how high they are on the top. So if you put them underneath the surface, the fruit flies can't get there. I've never had a problem with fruit flies, but I also don't keep this in my kitchen where fruit flies can't exist. In other situations where there are more fruit flies, I've heard of people doing a top layer of bedding just on the top, or even just laying newspaper down, slightly moistened newspaper. And the idea there is then the fruit flies can't get into the food, but the worms can still do their thing. So I've never had that problem, but if you do run into that problem or you're afraid of it, the idea is just making sure that the fruit flies can't get to the fruit and the vegetables by burying it or putting a protective layer over the container. And then there's also worm death. And worm death can happen in a handful of different ways, such as escaping. So what happened here in this worm bin is that this was stored outdoors and it just flushed. It was after a rain and the worms were way too wet. And this is generally how you can tell if your worms are happy or unhappy. If they are trying to escape, they are not happy. So when I first got my worm bin, I'd open it up and you'd see them crawling up the sides, and there would even be some dried along the ground where they got out through the holes. They're not happy. And what I found is they were too wet. So I just had to moderate the moisture until I found that perfect temperature where they weren't too dry and they weren't too wet. They'll also try to escape if there's not enough food because they're looking for food as well. And then some of them just get curious. So you might have some that are just, I like to think that the curious ones are thinning the herd because I don't need to worry about them escaping. But in general, this is different than having one or two. I would have a lot when they weren't happy coming up, kind of like that. There are different ways you can set up your bed so you don't have those problems. This is all that this is. So what I did here, I should explain that a little bit too. So this is just a Tupperware bin that I drilled holes into the top of. And that's all like this is. There's no holes anywhere else. It's just there's some breathing holes here. And for some reason that this has perfectly worked for the proper moisture content and everything underneath my desk. I never have to spray this anymore. In the beginning I did, which is why I had the water bottle, just spraying it with water to make sure it had the proper moisture. There's a lot of different ways, especially if you look on the internet, of building these. Some people do a double system, and the idea with a double system is you would just take an exact another one of these Tupperwares, put maybe some wood or some rocks in the bottom so it has something to sit on, and put this in top there. The idea with that is if the worms escape, they'll go into the second bin, and then you can rescue them and put them back, or they just don't end up on your floor, dried up and gross. So that's one of the ways that people do that too. Then there's all kinds of fancy ways of like having screens and stuff like that. The ones that you can purchase is like a screen system. So as they eat the food, it kind of breaks down and goes down into the thing. But like this works great, and it cost me the worms and the bin, which is really cost effective and really easy in my book. So there's a ton of different ways to do it. This has just worked really, really well for me, and it's really easy to do that way. The color also doesn't matter. I just got this on sale after Christmas because that's why it's Christmas color.
What about air, is that airtight? Is that?
This is like, it's just like normal, but it doesn't have to be airtight. This is because there's the hole here so that they can get through, like air flow in. If those weren't there, that'd be a problem because there wouldn't be enough air. But if you have it off all the time, then you're gonna be losing way too much moisture. So having this like amount of holes that are decent sized.
Oh, I didn't see the hole.
Yeah, there's little holes in there too, yeah. And there's holes there, and there's also holes like where you pick it up, and they do kind of try to escape there. They haven't tried to escape in a really long time, which is great. They like it here.
You'd be better off to make the holes in the top instead of the side.
You can definitely do that
You
too.
know, so
They still get to the top.
you still get up there.
Yeah, like so all of the little stuff you can see is from them crawling around.
Okay.
So they find a way. Very curious, entrepreneuring guys. But yeah, I think the side was just easier to do than the top. All right. And then, so releasing the casting. So this is a picture of one of the worms in the casting. And you can't see it super well, but this little circular lemon-shaped mass is actually the baby worms. So when they make the worms, that's kind of what they lay. There's eggs inside of that, and then they hatch out of that. That's a used one. They hatched, they left. It's going to have that darker color to it. And the reason why I point that out is when you're trying to remove the worms from the castings, you also want to try to get those with it. But I'm sure you can see already that this is going to be near impossible. How do you get the worms out of the castings before you use it? So there's a few different ways. The internet's full of different ways too. The first idea, and what I mostly did, is I live in an apartment, and I do weird things in my apartment, but it works. So I went out on my patio, and I put down a you can use like a tarp or something, and you kind of, the essence of, and what I think works really well is you use light to your advantage. The worms do not like light. They are really not cool with the fact that I've opened this right now. So they're going all the way to the bottom. So if you put all of this composted material kind of in a pile, and as they go in, you kind of bring off the top bit. So as you scoop off the top parts where they aren't because they've gone in, then you put that in. And this is going to take a while. Because you take a little off, then they go deeper, and you take a little more off, and you go a little bit deeper, and then you might have one here or there that you kind of plink back into the pile. Well, you do that. So that's using light to your advantage, where you just lay it out, wait till they get down, and you kind of pick it up. You can also use food migration. So the idea is if you just start putting all the food on one side of the bin, they'll go to that side of the bin. And then this side of the bin will be worm-free because there's no food there. And then in that case, you could actually just harvest it out and then put new material in and start feeding from there, and they'll go to that side. It all just depends on how much of a mess you want to make and how involved you want to get. You can also build screens and do things like that if you want to, but I found that it's very, it worked great for me. It just took a while to sit there and use the light and then pick out the little worms and try to find any of the little worm babies that I could see too, but it's kind of hard. So, but that kind of worked for me to get it and stuff. And like you could, if you wanted to, go through here and then pick it out, but that's even going to be longer too. And then it's like, oh, here's some worm castings. But yeah, if you use light to your advantage, that kind of works. Let me see, do I have anything else? Oh, and then how do you use that? So I use this for compost. So the reason why I did this in March and June is that's when I did my container gardens. And so I harvested and I put a bunch on the top of each of my pots before I planted it and worked it into the top layer of the soil. You can also use it for your indoor plants. When I harvest this in the next couple weeks, I'll be using it to top off all of my indoor plants. And it's just a super concentrated, really high quality compost in that way. So you just use it like you would normally use any other compost. It's just going to be really good at what it does. And it's not going to smell. It's not like the manure that we get in March and April in Wisconsin. It's great, which is why it's probably better for indoor plants. All right. I guess I already sort of demonstrated too. Are there any questions or anything? All right, so, yes.
Can you store the castings then for any amount of time? Like if
Yeah.
I wanted to store up a larger amount,
Mhm.
like over the entire winter to say to use over a flower bed or something?
Yeah,
in
you
the
could
spring?
totally do that.
You can, it doesn't like
No,
break
it won't
down and-
disintegrate or anything like that,
Okay.
yeah. You just put it in a bag and do that. And then some people also make teas out of it. I just don't like tea. They don't drink it, but they use it to water the plants. I know, right? It's kind of like compost tea, and I just don't think that works as effectively as just using the material itself. Because when you have this material in your pot, what happens is each time you water it a little bit more and a little bit more of it's slow released, and that's what makes compost really, really fantastic. But yeah, I wouldn't make tea out of it. But yeah, you can save it up. It might dry out a little bit, but then you just get it wet again, and it's totally fine. Oh, that's very nice. I play with them all the time, and then just brush off my hands, and it's fine. But not everybody is free with compost and dirt as I am. Any other questions at all? You guys are more than welcome to come and look at my worm bed. It'd be great if you're thinking of doing it to see what finished it looks like, and then see some of the worms if you want. And then you can also see how they ate through. Let's see what we got here. Yes. So here they're eating through an apple, if you want to see that. Oh yeah, this is the apple core. So I put 2 apple cores in a tea bag in, last week, maybe on Thursday. That's how much is left. Little worm coming out of it. He's mad at me. The tea bag might be in there still because they take a while on that. Oh, there's the other apple core. So it's cool if you were to look at that, you could see, the part that you don't eat because it's got the seeds in it and it's hard. That's that right there. I love it. Anyway, yeah. So that's kind of all I got. But you can definitely come up and look. You don't have to touch it if you don't want to, but you're totally more than welcome to. See?
My daughter's school does this.
Yeah.
I've been buying it for the last 2 years.
You know?
It is, but this is super easy.
You know?
You look for the
Yeah, it smells like,
Makes the work down plain.
and that's kind of why I like it, because
Smell the coffee.
yeah, the coffee, it smells really good this entire time. But yeah,
It's like that one doesn't, is that the same kind of worm?
yeah, and so this is, they're mad because I've just shuffled them up a little bit, but this is an apple, this has been in there for a little while, but it's cool because you can see how they ate through everything but the skin. This is all just, it just takes them a while, but that's really cool. That's what they did there.
I was concerned that
Oh,
I
here's the
wouldn't
tea
have
bag.
enough stuff, but I think I will.
Oh yeah,
And just the 2 of us, I'm not making that.
no, I don't,
You're
yeah.
feeding, so it's like.
Nope. Yeah, and when
So
I would,
that's-
if I were to feed it, I would just kind of dig down and then so this is a apple piece and then just kind of do that. Oh yeah, they don't like it too much. And then so what I do when I first, when I'm first building it up is every once in a while I will go in to make moisture and I will fluff it up a little bit. Because the idea is if the corners get too thick and mushed down, they might not be happy. And it might get bad, but they're pretty tolerant of it. But you can kind of see, usually if there's a mass of a plant, something they're eating through, you pick it up and you just see a bunch of them crawling around. But I've thoroughly made them angry today, so that's not happening as much.
There is some potting soil or?
This is no potting soil in it. This is all worm casting compost. It looked like that in June.
Oh, okay.
That's all just what they made. So you can still see some of the newspaper pieces that are left, or paper pieces that they didn't eat all the way through. So yeah,
But those wouldn't hurt you very at all.
not at all, yep. So yeah, this is totally ready to harvest. It's this is, and there they are, see? All the worms. I did in the beginning, yeah.
I think you're smelling.
Yeah,
the
that's
ones
the,
you
yeah,
just
yeah.
did.
Did you guys see?
I can smell the coffee.
Yeah, you can put your hands in and feel around if you want.
More for the worm production than.
Exactly. I had somebody call me oh, my husband did that for fishing in the basement. I'm like,
See, I got it now, but I
Yeah.
got them set on board with holes in the bottom,
you just do this and it's
and
fine.
then they won't come out, but
Yeah.
I have trouble, there's 17 zillion worms in there, but there's no size to them.
Oh,
You know, I
yeah.
got a ton of worms, but there's just no size.
Are these good size for fishing?
No, I didn't see anything there yet that,
Yeah,
you know, I use the red worms, you know.
yeah. But yeah,
But
I've heard people doing
I don't even
that.
have a cover on mine, I just put a sheet over it.
Yeah, here's some seeds that they haven't eaten yet either. You can see there, but that's fine.
But I have thousands and thousands of them in there, but
That's pretty good.
they don't have any size.
Yeah.
I use cornmeal, all I ever use is cornmeal.
Oh, okay.
We've got that regular,
Well, from Karina,
Yeah.
yeah, that's.
You can put your hands in and dig around if you want.
Do they grow bigger if they're at first when you're just putting them in there and there's just a few?
You know, I haven't actually paid attention. I think so. Like when they're first, like when you buy them from they're way
Yeah.
bigger. Yeah. But I guess that just in this, maybe I don't feed them enough.
Well, if
Yeah.
you overcrowd things sometimes. you get
Yeah,
stunted.
and that would make sense too.
That's what
yeah.
I'm wondering, if I got too many in there.
You could have that,
Because I
yeah.
used to have one, and now I got two, and I went to three,
Yeah.
you know?
See,
It's like,
And
And
it's
then
something
it won't outgrow.
So they'll just start eating themselves or dying off and stuff. So they're not going to become such. It's like kind of like goldfish. They only grow as big as their thing will allow. So yeah, if they're too small, it could just be that
you
there's
know,
too
I can
many
go
of
into
them.
a corner like that, and
Yeah.
I can get 500-600 worms.
So anybody here who wants worms needs to talk to you.
But they're all small, they're all small.
Yeah, yeah.
you know. I mean, a few years ago, I never bought worms for years,
Yeah.
you know, for fishing. I go fishing a lot. But all of a sudden, it's, where'd they go? You know, it's like, there's no size to them.
Yeah.
and then maybe you've got it too thick.
Maybe too thick, yeah.
Yeah.
But once a year, I use peat moss.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And this just works real well, like for my office. And that's the thing about it is it's there's not a particular science to it. This works well for me, and I like I just like the fact that I have it, and I create this compost, and it's really great, and it's very effective, and it doesn't smell at all, like, which I love. It just smells like compost.
Yeah.
Well, now it smells like coffee.
Coffee.
Because I demonstrated, but yeah.
I couldn't, I could smell it, I have a dog.
Yep.
So it would be like,
Yeah. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's my vermiposting bin. It's really easy. It's a lot of
well,
fun.
until winter.
See, that's not real deep either, I got it deeper.
You got it
I
deeper?
think yours
Yeah.
And the worms are always at the bottom.
Yep. Yeah.
They don't come out when he's got them on the wood.
Yeah, I wouldn't go too much deeper than like 4 or 5 inches, because then you just deal with like a compaction issue potentially on the bottom.
That's right.
Yeah.
Get chunks in there.
Yep. Yeah, but yeah, and that's the thing. Like this, I found works really well for me and my situation, and it creates great compost. And so whatever you guys figure
You
out.
were, use cornmeal in there, would you bury that too?
Probably just I just work it in like this, so then that way it's down a little bit, because then they can get to it, because they just don't want to be on the top usually. So they're all on the top now, and they'll go to the bottom as soon as. And this is a little.
There's some in there that would be okay.
That's not supposed to be in there, and that happens sometimes, but I don't know. It's like a centipede bug of some sort. So like that can happen. I've never had a problem where there are any insects or anything that parasitizes the worms themselves or really kind of destroys them, but it can happen. And in that situation, a lot of times you just kind of have to start over new, because it's like how you can't take
You
them
feed your
out.
worms to your fish,
You could do that. Yeah.
birds.
Yeah.
I got a warm house in my name.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so if you had like,
Hmm?
yeah, chickens love worms.
No,
Yeah.
worms, you touch
And
it.
this is about, I mean, this
These
is
are kind of like-
used to fertilize whatever.
Yeah, so I have about 10 different house plants, and this is going to be the perfect amount for it. And I make the perfect amount of food for it, like pour in a handful of vegetables every week or two. And the thing is I've forgotten to feed them or look at them for weeks at a time, and they've been fine.
Do the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, or
They-
maybe downstairs.
You're like, oh, I forgot, and they'll be fine, which is also makes it kind of fun. So, yeah. It's worth it. Yeah, no problem. Thank you guys so much for coming. I appreciate it. If you have any questions.
Newspaper, that's fluffy, the fluffier.
Yeah, it's a tiny bit wetter than I would have,
And
or
bury
wet.
their cornmeal.
What's that?
It's a little bit wetter than I would have liked, but not by much. Yeah, exactly. Not, and I would definitely if I were to do I would probably prefer it to be this level of height material. I think would work out a little bit better and give them more. But this is what I started with, and then that's what it became. So you can actually, like, it's interesting because you look at the quality of it, and it really does kind of look and seem like it's paper.
But I didn't know.
Work it in there, if you don't have
And that's like the little,
So how many,
You know,
Maybe where it's.
yeah,